The CMO Confidential podcast is a proud member of the I Hear Everything podcast network. Looking to launch or scale your podcast? I Hear Everything delivers podcast production, growth, and monetization solutions that transform your words into profit. Ready to give your brand a voice? Then visit iheareverything.com.
Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
In marketing, everything must work seamlessly. If not, efficiency, speed, and ROI all suffer. That's why Quad is obsessed with making sure your marketing machine runs smoothly, with less friction and smarter integration. Better marketing is built on Quad. See how better gets done at www.quad.com/buildbetter. Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a show that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com. Here today with my guest, Richard Sanderson. Today's topic, dissecting compensation, a primer on understanding, negotiating, and managing pay. Now, Richard began his career at Russell Reynolds and Booz and Company, and he moved on to Spencer Stuart, where he leads the marketing, communications, and sales practice. He leads approximately 25 searches a year for CMOs, CROs, CCOs, and sales leadership position. Now, this is his fourth time on the show in our 3-year run, and we consider him a CMO Confidential OG. Full disclosure, we've known each other for quite a while. Richard recruited me to the Allworth Financial Board. Welcome back, Richard.
Thank you, Mike. Fourth time is a pleasure. Does that mean I'm getting a cut of some of the advertising revenue soon?
You know, as soon as we get some, yeah. And then we're going to send you a hypothetical jacket that you can wear conceptually. So, hey, let's just start about, why we want to talk about compensation is it's a topic that everyone thinks about. It consumes a lot of discussion and backroom thinking, but it's not often discussed in the open. And so, it'd be great to break it into sections, the basic elements, negotiating comp, and then managing comp. And I thought we'd start with the building blocks, salary, bonus, and equity. Give us just a takedown on that.
Okay, well, first of all, Mike, you're right. This is a fascinating topic. It's actually a bit of a mysterious topic because certainly at the marketing leadership level, the reality is there is very little public information out there.
Right.
And not only that, as we all know, compensation is it's a topic which you don't talk about in polite company. So it is a somewhat mysterious area shrouded in mystery, and yet it's all we want to know about, and we all want to talk about it, and we all want to make sure we're doing the best we can. And I'll just tell you how little public information there is out there. I mean, for example, we have looked at the proxy statements of the largest Fortune 1000 companies. So that's the largest companies by the revenue or market cap. And as folks may know, if you look at the proxy statement, they are required to list named executive officers, which is typically the 5 highest paid officers in the company. Of 1,000 proxy statements, Mike, for 2024, we can only find references to marketing leaders at 41 of those.
Wow.
So approximately only 4% of companies have a marketing officer as one of their top 5 compensated employees. And even then, when we do look at those titles, the role is often broader than pure marketing.
So that's where you're getting your super CMOs, right?
Correct, exactly. These may be the CMO pluses, the CMO plus pluses, call them what you like, chief revenue, chief commercial, chief growth. There are a handful of what I call pure CMOs in there, but the sample size is really small. And hence it sort of adds a little bit to the, am I being paid at market? Is it fair? Am I getting the best deal? Can I do better? It all adds to the difficulty of this conversation.
Especially when you throw in the equity component, which can skew a year or 2 years versus a true pay plan,
Yeah,
right?
correct.
Because you got salary, bonus, and then equity. So kind of just take us through those
Yes.
three things, and then we'll jump into equity.
So yeah, so let's start with salary. That's obviously the piece that everyone knows. This is, I would say, base salary is the number that when we are negotiating compensation, this is the number that most people focus on. I think your base salary is a bit of a psychological anchor for everyone. I think to some extent it's a reflection of where you are in your career and your recognition. I think to make a move, most people are expecting their base salary to increase. It's, to me, it's the most visible and emotionally resonant part of the package, and the base salary number itself is nearly always open to negotiation when you change roles. What I would say to people is be aware of either company or industry norms.
We are taking a small break from the show to hear from our sponsor, Quad.
Marketing is all about high performance. Everything has to fit together and work together exactly right, or efficiency, speed, and ROI all suffer. That's why Quad is obsessed with making sure your marketing machine runs as smoothly as possible. We help you achieve a seamless marketing experience with less friction and smarter integration. Better marketing is built on Quad.
Now back to our discussion with Spencer Stuart practice leader Richard Sanderson.
Yeah.
Around base salaries, for example, financial services firms may offer low base salaries but higher bonuses.
Yeah.
And many large companies have essentially what they call salary grades or salary bands. So at a certain level of seniority, there is a window. It may be small, it may be large, but there is a limit to that puts a range on salary. Bonuses are most commonly expressed as a percent of base salary. There'll often be conditions in there. It's tied to either company performance, business unit performance, individual performance, some blend of all of the above. I find when negotiating offers, actually bonuses is actually probably the hardest bit to negotiate on, because they are set percentages of base salaries, and that percentage is often reflective of the level or the band or the range of the role that we were going into. I think the key question to ask about bonuses is, what has been the bonus payout history over the last 3 years? So where has the bonus paid relative to target, above target, at target, or below target? And I think that reveals whether the targets are realistic, and also a little bit about recent company performance. The final big area, and you hinted at this, Mike, it's equity. This is complex. The devil is in the detail, as they say, and there's a lot of detail here. Long-term incentives, equity, really are a major part, particularly of CMO pay, particularly in public companies. There are lots of different types.
Hey, before we go into different types, I just want to get your advice for our listeners on this. Why base salary is often the most emotional, really, where you end up making usually a lot of money, is in the equity piece. Maybe sometimes you get a big kicker in the bonus, but it's really equity. And when you're younger, maybe you're not paying that much attention to equity, and you're more fixated on base salary. Is that true or not?
Partially. So we'll come back to equity in a second, because we were talking about equity, a salary or compensation components. Where you're getting to, Mike, is a slightly different point, which is compensation mix.
Yeah. Okay.
Now this is an important point too. So this is a balance of what's, short-term compensation is basically referring to base and bonus. Long-term reflects equity. Now the mix depends on a whole bunch of issues. So let me give you some example. Ownership. If a company is public versus private, or private equity, or even non-profits. Non-profits, some private, family-held companies, for example, simply may not issue equity in the form of a private equity portfolio company. There's all sorts of conditions attached to that, and we may come back to that in a moment. The more traditionally understood is this sense of either restricted stock units, options, equity. Now, the mix bit is important, Mike, because there are some stylistic differences, not only around ownership structure, but I'll give you another example: geographic differences. In my experience, American-based companies do lean much more heavily into equity as a part of the compensation mix. Companies based out of Europe, on the other hand, actually do not.
Right.
And I typically will see, if we're negotiating an offer with a client for a European headquartered business, typically equity is actually a smaller part of the total compensation package. So there are all sorts of stylistic, ownership, and other structural issues that impact that mix that you're talking about, short term versus long term.
So give us the little primer on the various types of equity.
Yeah. Okay. So look at it at its highest level. The two most common forms were what were called RSUs, restricted stock units, and options. Restricted stock units are essentially straightforward issuance of equity at the market price. You can sit there and work it out. People have their online portals they can go into, and it directly correlates with the rise or fall in share price.
And the way an RSU would work, just to make sure everyone gets it right, is you get a bunch of stock. It's at $10 a share. You get 100 shares that vest at X time. If it's at $10, that's what you get. If it's at $12, that's what you get. And if it's at $1, that you just get the same number of shares, right?
Correct. So they have value essentially no matter where the share price is, as long as the share price is not at zero.
Right.
There is some value associated with them. There's a whole talk about vesting cycles. We can come back to that in a second. The next variant is options. So options have something called a strike price. So you'll hear people talk about, am I in the money or not? Valuing options is a lot more complicated. There's various mathematical models, Black-Scholes being the most commonly attributed one. It's complex. I would say options are essentially a little bit more risky. If they go up, there's substantial increase in value. If they go below the strike price, there's no value whatsoever, and you're on what's referred to as being underwater.
And that's where we go back to our example. If you get the options at $10, you don't make any money unless the stock goes up.
Yeah.
And if the stock goes down to $9 versus 10, you're $1 underwater.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And more recently, I've seen now a significant part of equity compensation is what's called performance share units, so PSUs. Now these are essentially, in my opinion, a juiced up variant of restricted stock units. They're essentially issued conditionally, and it will often be associated with the company meeting various strategic targets, various KPIs or metrics. And performance share units can have accelerators or even decelerators on them based on where the company is meeting those particular targets. The most common example I've seen is that they'll tell you, look, here's the value, and they can increase 0 to 200% based on whether we're going to hit some of these key metrics that are defined in the market.
And those metrics examples might be either sales targets or total shareholder return.
Yeah, correct. It's defined by the board of directors. It's trying to align the entire company and the team around various targets. It can be sales targets, can be profitability targets, can be earnings per share targets. I mean, there's almost an infinite array of metrics against which you can set these performance share units.
Yeah, I ran 2 comp committees and public boards, and there is an infinite amount of arguing that could go with this infinite amount of metrics as well.
Right. So that's the types of equity. Then there's so when can you actually realize them? When can you take them off the table? And so this is obviously vesting. Fundamentally, there's 2 types of vesting. By far the most common is time-based vesting. So literally you are running out the clock. The most common form used to be what was referred to as a cliff vest at 3 years. So in other words, at 3 years from issuance, you could essentially sell them.
And to make sure everyone knows what you mean by vesting, that is when you get a chance to buy it. Yeah.
When you actually get a chance to monetize.
It becomes yours.
Correct. It becomes more than just a number on an online portal that says what it could be worth, to a point where you could actually sell it.
Yes.
If you want to do it. Before then, it's all paper money.
Yes, thank you.
It has some value, but you cannot monetize it until you get to the vesting.
And if you leave before you vest, often you're forfeiting everything, right?
Often, that's also up for negotiation. That's probably one of the points we'll come to. I would say we're seeing lots of variance on time-based equity. The 3-year cliff vest was very typical. certainly on, I'd say, West Coast or more technology companies have moved to an accelerated schedule. There's often now a cliff at 1 year, and now in some cases even monthly vesting, 1/24th or 1/36th, for example, or even 1/48th each month now. Now that helps with cash flow, but just to say that 3-year cliff vest that used to be very typical, even that now has iterated quite substantially over the different types of time vesting. For any public company, by the way, I mean, this is all stated in the proxy statement. What you can't really do is individually negotiate, what your vesting cycle is going to be. I mean, there is a program that is the structure. You cannot negotiate it. You're either in or you're out. And so I don't want people thinking, they can start individually negotiating components like that. It's not. I think we're simply identifying that there are many different types of equity, vesting cycles of equity, and how they exist, and valuation models as well.
And then, so there's time, and then there's performance, which performance equity or performance RSUs, which is, we kind of talked about them.
And there's one more. There can be event-based vesting. I mean, this can be linked, for example, to an IPO, a sale of a company. So if a company comes in and buys your company, I mean, they're essentially buying up all the equity on the spot. So that's an example of more an event-based trigger as opposed to a time-based trigger.
So we're going to talk about like negotiating now, because you got to figure out, this is super complicated when you really get, particularly when you get into the equity portion we just talked about. How do you recommend candidates think through comp? Usually even before they're looking at gigs and how they get paid, but give us advice for how to think about this.
So I think there's at least 3 or 4 subtopics here, Mike. I'll just lay them on the table and you can decide which ones you want to go through here. I think first of all, and I'm now really in the mode, sort of in the executive recruiter mode, which is what I'm in, which is how and when do you negotiate compensation? And I'm specifically in the situation of when you may be considering changing roles or changing companies. So topic number 1 to discuss would be, when is the right time to discuss compensation? Topic number 2 that I encourage people to be aware of is, what are some of the new compensation and pay equity laws that may frame that conversation? Number 3 is, how do you manage the expectation setting element of compensation negotiations? And then what is the right style or posture to take during a negotiation? So there's lots of different things, and Mike, I'm very happy to go through these at a high level one by one.
Let's just touch on the first one, because also in that is know what you're getting paid now, so you don't I've had people leave like 2 months ahead of getting massive grants because they weren't paying attention.
Right. So first of all, when to discuss compensation with a recruiter or a company. So when in the process. And I think timing is delicate. I think if you start asking about compensation too early, you risk coming across as overly focused just on the money side, as opposed to the challenge or the opportunity. On the other hand, if you leave the conversation too late, you may be wasting time if your expectations don't align with where the company or the role wants to pay.
Right.
There is an element of negotiation theory that says, look, the first person to put a number out there is essentially setting the anchor.
Right.
Negotiation. I do think there is some truth to that, but that anchor that you throw out also has to be grounded in some sort of reality. You can't just throw out, I think, silly numbers, because I think you lose your
unless you are Elon Musk, apparently. So
I think we're looking at $1 trillion. I heard.
I think so.
And then, I think also be ready with what is the right response. And we'll come to this in a second, because increasingly now recruiters and their representatives are essentially trained to ask about expectations, not about compensation history. And the reason for that, Mike, is a number of compensation and pay equity laws have passed on a state level, not a federal level to be clear, on a state level over the last 10 years. California, New York City, Oregon, Delaware, Massachusetts, Illinois, the state of Washington, and others. I mean, put bluntly, it's the blue coastal states, Mike.
Right.
Is where a lot of this is happening, where now recruiters are actually prohibited asking about compensation history. Instead now, and certainly everyone at Spencer Stuart is trained to ask about expectations, not about history. To be clear, candidates and you can still volunteer your history. It's not required, but we cannot directly ask it. Now, here's my honest experience of handling this, Mike. When I ask the compensation expectations question, most people do not know how to answer that question. For exactly the reason we said, if I set a number too high or too low, I'm going to look stupid, or I'm leaving something on the table, I'm going to come across as greedy. I'm not going to, 80 to 90% of people do not know how to answer the expectations question. And they end up reverting to, well, look, here's where I am, because that's the one number they know. So inadvertently, candidates may choose to share history, but just be aware, recruiters in many jurisdictions cannot and should not and will not directly ask you about your compensation history. What they can do and should ask you about is what's referred to as forfeitures. So if you were to walk away, what are you leaving on the table? This was your point. I mean, are you leaving at the right time? When is something vesting? What do we need to be aware of? What short-term annual bonus could you be leaving on the table?
Right. If I'm 3 months ahead of bonus, I'm leaving a lot bonus maybe on the table.
Particularly acute for searches being run this time of year. So, late Q3 and Q4. Most companies run on a fiscal year that aligns to the calendar year. Bonuses are paid typically January through coming to the final quarter now. You are essentially, if you leave in Q4, you are essentially giving up most of your last year's accrued bonus. How is that going to be taken care of or accounted for? That's an example of a forfeiture. All the equity we spoke about, what is it worth over what period of time? When is it going to vest? If you leave, are you giving it up? That is a forfeiture. A recruiter can, could, and should ask you about that, and you should be ready to address and answer that question. This is a broader point around what these compensation laws are and what you need to be ready for. This expectations thing, as I said, look, that is the topic that I think most people struggle with. What I would say is, look, do a little bit of research, use recruiters, use your peer networks, maybe even use some proxy statements where relevant. Although, as I said at the beginning, 4% of companies even have a marketing leader on their proxy statement. But be thoughtful, put an aspirational, anything that's too high or too low can frankly send the wrong signal.
And beneath all this, I'm hearing, know how you get paid, know how your company rules are in terms of vesting, bonus, because the bonus may get paid at the end of the year, but you also may have to be in seat in February 15th or March 15th to get it.
That is correct.
So you really want to know the rules, and you don't want to be fumbling around with it. And then how, you were telling us how to manage the question about what are your expectations. Are there any other best practices in there?
Well, here's where I would go with the expectations question. I get all sorts of responses to this. I mean, part of it is, a savvy candidate will actually turn the question around on me.
Right.
I mean, it's not, and in most cases, I'm not flying blind. I mean, most recruiters are going into a role in a search with some knowledge, roughly speaking, it may not be gospel truth, but directionally where the role is. Again, a recruiter doesn't want to, tip their hand too much or give too much away. So it's a really delicate dance. But I find the more savvy, sophisticated candidates will actually push it back and put me in a slightly awkward.
And do a thing like, hey, Richard, do they have a range they are thinking about for this job?
Precisely. So I would actually think about pushing back on that. It's not so much pushing back, but actually responding to a question with a question, almost making it rhetorical, and seeing what information that may reveal. I mean, at the end of the day, Mike, this is all about information asymmetry.
Yeah.
The recruiter has more information than you do about compensation's role, and they're trying to. This is not the right. I don't want to say they're trying to exploit that. That is not the case. But they are trying to get to a solution that works for their client. Remember, recruiters, executive search consultants are paid by clients. They're not paid by candidates.
Right.
And so they want to do what's right by the client. Now, what I will say to my clients is, you are not only looking to recruit a candidate, you're looking to retain a candidate as well over the long term. So being penny wise but pound foolish on compensation negotiation often can backfire.
So you had your 4 things. Did we get through all 4 here?
I'll give you one other, which I think is really interesting, which is once you get into a negotiation, so how does negotiation actually work? My general feeling and experience is there's typically one round of negotiation.
So you get one big ask after you get
correct.
Get this.
So in other words, let's say you're the chosen candidate, you've gone through all the interviews, probably the referencing has been done, all the background checks have been done, the offer is forthcoming. There may have been some expectation setting, or there may have not before you received the offer, but now you get the offer. In most cases, the offer is expressed verbally first.
Right.
And then, can you accept this offer, yes or no? In my experience, that is your moment as a candidate. That is your moment of highest leverage. They've made it clear they want you. They've probably maybe even switched off most of the other candidates. So, the eggs are all in the basket here. They want you. They want to make it work. You haven't committed. This is your greatest moment of leverage. That said, it is about doing the right thing. In my experience, this is your opportunity now to respond to this and very clearly say, look, based on this is what I think I need to make it work.
This is the end of part 1 of our discussion with Richard Sanderson. Please join us next week for part 2 of our discussion.
In marketing, everything must work seamlessly. If not, efficiency, speed, and ROI all suffer. That's why Quad is obsessed with making sure your marketing machine runs smoothly, with less friction and smarter integration. Better marketing is built on Quad. See how better gets done at www.quad.com/buildbetter.
What?